So our servo drive line we designate as CMMT. I'm going to talk specifically about the multi-protocol functionality on there. But first, let me just define the drive portfolio for you. So basically, the CMMT servo drive portfolio, we have power class from 300 watts, that's this tiny drive down here, all the way up to 6 kilowatts. That's what we can sell today. Later this year, we're going to actually double the power classes available up to 12 kilowatts. So we're going to release 2 new drives, one for 9 kilowatts and one for 12 kilowatts. And so that's going to make it possible for us to reach even more power intensive applications. And within this product range, we have a DC servo drive. That's the little guy you see down here. That one supports stepper motors. It supports DC servo motors. And then we also have the range of AC servo motors, which include single phase and 3-phase voltages. So, the takeaway from all of this is we have an extensive range of servo drives, and we can do the vast majority of industrial applications with such a huge range of servo drives and motors. So now let's get into the sort of the functionality of these things. So we've had CMMT as a servo drive type since 2018. Since that point, we have been updating the product range in a variety of ways. So, for example, when we first released, we only had these lower 6 part numbers, and since then we've added 2 additional power classes over the years. And then last year, we released this additional functionality and what we're calling a multi-protocol servo drive. And so what that means is the way it used to be is a customer would either order the Ethernet IP version of a drive or the Profinet version of a drive or the EtherCAT version of a drive. And we had to have all of those on the shelf in stock for the customer to order them. With the new multi-protocol version, we don't have to stock 3 separate versions. We just stock one multi-protocol version, and then the customer configures it during the commissioning process. So if the customer needs it to be Profinet, they configure it for that. If it's EtherCAT, they configure it for that, and so on. So that's a really nice new functionality. One of the significant improvements for that is inventory management, and that affects both us as well as our customers. From our side, it means we go from 8 part numbers, from 24 part numbers that we were stocking down to 8 part numbers because it reduces it by 3 because we used to stock 3 separate field bus types. Now we don't have to make that distinction. We just stock the multi-protocol version. So that's awesome because we never run into this scenario where we have the EtherCAT version on the shelf or the Profinet version and the customer wants to order Ethernet IP, but oops, we just sold out of that one. Instead, as long as we have any one of these, as long as we have one of the multi-protocol ones on the shelf, we can support any one of these field buses. The other thing that's nice is a lot of our customers also stock these servo drives, either because they're working on multiple projects or for spare part purposes. And if they don't have to make these kinds of distinctions between, oh, well, I need to have the EtherCAT project on the shelf for this project, but I need the Ethernet IP one on the shelf for that project. Instead, they just have 10 of them on their, in their warehouse where they can pull what they need for the project and then configure it. That's really nice for their inventory management as well. In addition to inventory management, the redesign of these drives was a huge opportunity for us. It was a kind of a mixture of luck and skill. We were lucky in that we were going to be doing this redesign anyway because we wanted to include the multi-protocol chipset. We were, on top of it because we recognized, hey, this is happening in the middle of a delivery crisis where chips are very difficult to get. And what we saw what we've seen throughout this 3-year crisis is that basically the chip manufacturers want to be selling their latest and greatest chips. They don't really want to produce the older ones. I don't know the internals of their what's causing them to prioritize it, but I imagine they make better margins on their latest chips than they do on the older ones, something to that effect. And so that drove them to prioritize the newer chips. And so we realized, well, hey, we're having difficulty getting the older ones. Let's upgrade these other chipsets too. And so basically we did a complete redesign on a lot of the integrated circuits in our servo drives. And so over the last year, as we've released these new multi-protocol drives, we've seen our delivery situation go from, potentially months before we could deliver drives to basically back to normal, where we're stocking these on the shelf and we ship them the next day, basically. And so that's been a it's had a huge impact on our delivery situation. And I know we still have competitors in the server drive field who are, quoting months out for delivering. And that's been a huge advantage for us and a huge advantage for our customers because they can get those server drives fast and they don't have machines that they've built waiting on server drives anymore. And then the last piece of this is in that redesign, we were able to improve the processor and increase the RAM. And so that's allowed us to add additional functionality to these servo drives. And one example of that is the integrated web server that's now available on the CMMT product family. And what this does is it lets the servo drive host a website. And so now when the customer goes to parameterize to configure those servo drives, well, if you've got a serial machine builder, they're going to build a prototype. They're going to know what parameter file they have for each of the drives that are on that machine. And then every time they go and duplicate that machine, well, they can use the web browser now for all those duplications. And that's a much easier interface for them to access the server drive. So for example, the engineer who's doing the commissioning, now they don't have to use our special software to configure those server drives. Instead, they can just open a web browser, type in the IP address of the server drive, and download the firmware, download the parameter file, and then they're done. So it speeds up their cycle time and it reduces their reliance on our software. They can just use a general web browser. So that's been a really huge set of improvements for these drives based on what was, basically going to be I don't want to say a simple upgrade. I mean, it's great that we have the multi-protocol chipset, but it ended up being a significant improvement to the entire servo drive series because of that.